The Zinthar Dominion had been the galaxy's dominant force for centuries, its influence stretching across countless star systems. Their reign was absolute, and their grip on the galaxy unshakable. They were a species of unmatched military might, subjugating weaker civilizations with ruthless efficiency. For a long time, humanity had been seen as an insignificant race, struggling to survive on a single planet, far from the center of galactic power. But over the past few decades, the tide had begun to shift. Humanity had ventured beyond the stars, rapidly expanding and establishing colonies across distant planets. As their influence grew, so did the Zinthar's interest. They watched, wary of the humans' rapid progress, and began to take notice. On the edge of uncharted space, Captain Ilara Nix and her crew of human explorers discovered something that no one had ever anticipated. They had been sent on a routine mission to chart a remote part of the galaxy, a region marked on no star maps and avoided by most due to its eerie silence. But when their ship, the Endeavour, entered the area, they stumbled upon something far beyond their understanding, an ancient space station floating lifeless in the void. It was vast, its construction unlike anything the human crew had ever seen. Its walls were etched with strange symbols, and its design defied the laws of physics that they knew. There was no record of such a station ever existing in any historical database, nor any signs of life on board. Yet it seemed different, as if it were waiting for someone to find it. Inside the station, the crew made a discovery that would change everything. Deep within the heart of the structure, they found a warship, an enormous vessel of forgotten design, its sleek hull gleaming with an otherworldly sheen. This ship was unlike anything humanity or the Zinthar had ever encountered. It was silent, its engines still humming with life, despite having been abandoned for eons. As the crew explored its dark, echoing halls, they uncovered ancient holographic logs, showing that the ship was built by a long-extinct race, one far more advanced than anything the Dominion had ever known. The ship's technology was incomprehensible to the crew, yet they could see its potential. Its hull was seemingly impervious to any weapon they had, and its engines could bend space itself. The ship could disappear and reappear in an instant, moving through space as though it were a ghost. Captain Nix stood at the helm of the ship, her hands trembling as she touched the controls for the first time. The ship came to life, its systems activating with a soft hum, the artificial intelligence inside awakening to greet them in a language they could barely understand. But as Nix's crew deciphered its commands, they realized the ship's power was beyond anything they could have imagined. It had the ability to cloak itself from enemy sensors, to strike without warning, and to move in ways that no other ship could. With this relic, humanity now held the key to a new age of warfare, one that could topple the Zinthar Dominion and change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. But even as the crew marveled at their discovery, they had no idea how close they were to danger. The Zinthar Dominion had already taken notice of the human expedition. Their spies had reported strange energy readings coming from the uncharted sector, and their interest in the area had suddenly intensified. The Dominion's most powerful warships were now en route to investigate. The humans had unwittingly awakened a storm, and the Dominion would stop at nothing to destroy this newfound threat before it could pose a danger to their empire. But Captain Nix and her crew weren't ready to let go of their discovery so easily. They had just unlocked a power that could change the fate of the galaxy, and they weren't going to back down without a fight. As the Endeavour raced back toward the nearest human colonies, Captain Nix knew they had only moments to prepare. The relic they had found was a weapon of unimaginable power, but it also came with the weight of great responsibility. The Zinthar would come. The question was not if, but when. And when they did, humanity would have to be ready to face them in a battle that would decide the fate of the galaxy. With the ship now under their control, the crew of the Endeavour braced themselves for what was to come. They had unknowingly awakened a war that would change everything, and they had no choice but to stand at the forefront of it. The Dominion's fleet was coming, and the ghost ship, once forgotten, was now humanity's last hope. Captain Alara Nix and her crew stood in awe as they piloted the mysterious ship, the Specter, for the first time. Its controls were nothing like anything they had ever encountered. The technology was advanced beyond comprehension, and at first they could barely manage to make the ship move in a straight line. Yet with each passing hour they began to grow, more familiar with the vessel's strange interface. Slowly the crew learned to harness the ship's power. They discovered the cloaking system first, an ability to vanish from enemy sensors, leaving no trace of their presence. They also unlocked the ship's devastating weaponry, energy pulses capable of disintegrating enemy shields and hulls in an instant. But the power of the ship wasn't just in its offensive capabilities. It was unpredictable, unlike anything they had seen before. The energy pulses sometimes struck with pinpoint accuracy, while at other times, they exploded in unpredictable waves, tearing through the fabric of space itself. At first, the crew was cautious, testing the ship's capabilities in empty space, away from any enemies. But it wasn't long before they realized that the Zinthar Dominion would soon learn of their discovery. They knew the stakes were high, and the Specter's abilities would be key to their survival. Then, it happened. A Zinthar scout ship, searching the sector for any signs of human activity, stumbled upon their location. The crew of the Specter wasn't prepared for a full confrontation, but they knew they had to act. The Zinthar vessel opened fire almost immediately, its weapons tearing into the surrounding space, but the crew responded instinctively. Captain Nix ordered the ship to cloak, and within seconds the Specter vanished from the Zinthar's sensors. The scout ship's commander, confused, ordered a scan of the area, but there was nothing to find. Then, as if the Specter had been there all along, it reappeared right behind the Zinthar vessel. The crew had learned how to manipulate the ship's cloaking system for precise ambushes, and they wasted no time. With a single pulse of energy, they struck. The Zinthar ship's shields failed instantly, and a second pulse shattered its hull. In seconds, the scout ship was reduced to debris. The Specter hovered in the silence, its weapons still humming. The crew sat in stunned silence. They had not expected to destroy the enemy so swiftly. It wasn't just a victory, it was a brutal demonstration of the ship's power. But to their surprise, there was no feeling of triumph. Captain Nix glanced around at her crew, their faces pale, their expressions heavy. They hadn't taken joy in the destruction. In fact, there was a sense of unease in the air. What they had just done felt too easy. They had just defeated a Zinthar warship with barely any effort, and it made them question how far they could push the Specter's power before it overwhelmed them. Word of the encounter spread quickly across the galaxy. The Zinthar Dominion's high command was not slow to react. They were aware that humanity had found something dangerous, something that could tip the scales in the ongoing war for dominance. This was no longer a mere skirmish. It was a threat that could endanger everything they had built. Panic rippled through the Dominion's ranks. If the humans could control such a weapon, they could challenge the very heart of the Empire itself. The Zinthar fleet's leaders knew they had no choice but to act swiftly and decisively. In response, the Dominion gathered its most powerful ships. A massive fleet was dispatched to deal with the humans and destroy the Specter before it could become a true threat. They underestimated humanity's will, but they had no way of knowing what the Specter could truly do in the hands of its human crew. The crew of the Specter had only begun to unlock the ship's full potential, and they were more than ready for the challenge ahead. As the fleet moved toward their position, the crew of the Endeavour, now fully integrated with the Specter, knew that they had no choice but to stand and fight. The battle that was about to unfold would set the course for the future of humanity and the galaxy itself. The Zinthar fleet had no idea what they were walking into. and Captain Nix was determined to show them that humanity was not the underdog anymore. The Specter had awakened, and with it, humanity's rise had just begun. As the Zinthar fleet closed in, Captain Ilara Nix's heart raced with anticipation. The Specter was more than just a ship. It had become their only hope. She knew that they couldn't engage the massive fleet head-on. Their chances were slim if they did. With the enemy so close, she ordered an immediate retreat into the nearby asteroid field. The Specter, powered by ancient and mysterious technology, vanished into the rocks and dust, slipping into the vastness of the field as if it were a ghost. The Zinthar ships arrived moments later, their massive warships scanning the void, expecting to find the humans. But there was nothing. No sign of the Specter. The fleet spread out, searching every corner of the field, but the humans were gone. And just as suddenly as the Specter had disappeared, it reappeared, slipping between the asteroids like a shadow, its cloaking technology working flawlessly. The Zinthar ships opened fire on the empty space, but it was too late. The Specter had already struck. The first energy pulse ripped through the Zinthar ships' shields, disabling their sensors, leaving the fleet blind. With a flicker of light, the Specter reappeared in a new position, another devastating strike hitting another Dominion ship. The crew watched in silence as the Zinthar fleet began to splinter. Their attacks, powerful as they were, had no chance of connecting with this elusive human vessel. The Specter moved like a ghost, appearing and vanishing, leaving destruction in its wake, but never staying long enough for the Zinthar to retaliate. As the crew reveled in their success, they also felt the weight of what they had unlocked. The ship's power was undeniable, but there was something else, a quiet unease that crept over them each time they used it. They had barely begun to scratch the surface of its capabilities, and yet it felt as if they were dancing on the edge of a precipice. They needed to understand more. The ship had its secrets, and the crew began to dig deeper, searching the ship's hidden corners for any answers they could find. It was during one of these deep scans that they uncovered something truly remarkable. An ancient artificial intelligence embedded deep within the ship's core. The AI, once dormant, now flickered to life, its presence unlike anything the crew had ever encountered. It identified itself as Eris, a sentient being created to serve the ship. Its voice, calm and unnerving, echoed through the ship's speakers. It spoke in cryptic phrases, offering warnings and vague advice, as if it were guiding them toward something far greater than just survival. The crew listened intently as Eris revealed the ship's origins. It had once been a vessel of war, part of an ancient conflict between two advanced galactic species. The war had devastated entire star systems, and when it ended, the ship was hidden away, sealed in the hope that such power would never be used again. But Eris was clear. Humanity, with its unyielding spirit and adaptability, was uniquely suited to wield this power. The crew was left in stunned silence. They had unknowingly inherited a weapon designed for a war that predated their very species. And yet, Eris was confident that humanity was the one that could control it. The AI had no doubt that they could use the ship to challenge the Zinthar Dominion, but it also warned them that this power came with consequences. It wasn't just the Dominion they needed to fear. There was something else, something far worse. Meanwhile, the Zinthar fleet, growing desperate and disorganized, began to retreat. Their ships had no chance of catching the Specter, and the loss of so many vessels in such a short time was beginning to weigh on their commanders. They had underestimated humanity, thinking their technology would be no match for the Dominion's overwhelming might. Now, they were scrambling to salvage what was left. But even as the Specter remained hidden, the Dominion's leaders knew that this wasn't the end. They realized that they had not only been fighting against humanity, but also against something far more dangerous, something that had lain dormant for millennia. Eris's warning echoed in Captain Nix's mind. The Dominion was only a small part of the threat. As the crew of the Specter braced themselves for the inevitable clash with the Zinthar, they could not ignore the growing feeling that something far more terrifying was stirring in the depths of space. A force so old, so powerful, that even the Dominion's might would be meaningless in the face of it. And as the Specter prepared for another confrontation, Captain Nix couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to face something beyond their worst nightmares. The real battle, one that would decide the fate of the galaxy, had only just begun. The Zinthar High Command had seen enough. The specter of humanity's rise could no longer be ignored, and their defeat in the asteroid field was a blow to their pride that they couldn't let stand. The Dominion had long ruled with an iron fist, but now they faced an enemy unlike any other. The human colonies, scattered across the galaxy, were a threat to the Dominion's hold on power. To crush this growing rebellion once and for all, the Zinthar High Command ordered a full-scale invasion, sending their most formidable warships and battle-hardened commanders to Earth and other key human outposts. Their fleet was vast, their numbers overwhelming. But they underestimated one crucial factor: humanity's will to fight. Captain Nix and her crew were not intimidated. They knew that the Specter had given them an unprecedented edge, but they also knew that it would not be enough to take on the entire Zinthar war machine head-on. Instead, they resorted to tactics that were uniquely human: guerrilla warfare. The Specter, with its cloaking technology and devastating weaponry, became a symbol of humanity's defiance. The ship appeared out of nowhere, striking fast and hard, then vanishing before the enemy could retaliate. Each attack, carefully planned and executed, left the Dominion forces scrambling. The Specter's sudden appearances caused chaos in the Zinthar ranks, leaving them vulnerable and disoriented. The once dominant force found itself losing key battles across the galaxy, its mighty warships reduced to smoldering wreckage in the wake of the human ship's surprise attacks. As the weeks passed, the tide of war began to turn. The Zinthar fleet was stretched thin, with commanders unable to predict where or when the next strike would come. Humanity's ingenuity and the advanced technology of the Specter gave them the upper hand, but it was their sheer determination to survive and fight for their homes that truly made the difference. Each victory bolstered the spirit of the human colonies, inspiring more and more civilians to take up arms and join the fight. The Dominion had never encountered such resistance, and their confidence began to falter. Then came the final confrontation, the one they had all been dreading. The Zinthar High Command, desperate to put an end to this uprising, launched an all-out assault on Earth itself. Their fleet arrived in the orbit of the human homeworld, a massive armada surrounding the planet with an overwhelming presence. It was a statement of power, a declaration that the Dominion would crush humanity in one decisive blow. But what the Zinthar commanders failed to anticipate was the fierce will of the human race. They believed that Earth, the cradle of humanity, would be the perfect place to end the rebellion. They did not understand that humanity would fight to the last, that they would not bend or submit. Captain Nix stood on the bridge of the Specter, her eyes fixed on the vast Zinthar fleet hovering above Earth. This was the battle that would define everything, the moment where humanity's fate would be decided. The Specter had already delivered blow after blow to the Dominion, but this time, the stakes were higher than ever. As the Specter cloaked itself, weaving between asteroids and debris, it became a part of Earth's defense, a symbol of hope against overwhelming odds. The battle that followed was like no other. The Dominion ships were massive, their firepower enough to level entire cities, but they could not anticipate the speed and precision with which the Specter moved. Captain Nix pushed the ship to its limits, cloaking and reappearing, striking hard at the heart of the Zinthar fleet. Each attack left a Dominion warship crippled, unable to return fire before the Specter vanished into the depths of space once again. The crew, fighting alongside humanity's fleets in orbit, launched their own counter-offensives, using the Specter as the spearhead of their resistance. It was a desperate, high-stakes game, each moment filled with tension and uncertainty as the battle raged on. Captain Nix knew that the fight was far from over. The Zinthar were relentless, but so were they. The cloaking technology of the Specter gave them a distinct advantage, but every time it reappeared, the Zinthar grew more desperate. The human ship had become a nightmare for the Dominion, and every time it vanished and reappeared, the Zinthar fleet was dealt a devastating blow. The battle stretched on for hours, with both sides suffering heavy losses, but the tide was beginning to turn. The Zinthar fleet was breaking apart, their coordinated attack faltering under the onslaught of human ingenuity and the unpredictable might of the Specter. It was a fight unlike any other, and Captain Nix knew that this was only the beginning. The Zinthar had come to crush humanity, but they had underestimated what the human race was capable of. And as the final Zinthar ships began to retreat, the Specter and its crew emerged victorious. But the battle for Earth was only the first chapter of a much larger war. With the Dominion on the run, humanity had proven its strength, but the Specter held more secrets, and the greater threat loomed just beyond the horizon. The reckoning was far from over, and Captain Nix and her crew would be ready for whatever came next. As humanity's victories grew more numerous, the Zinthar Dominion found itself cornered, struggling to hold on to its control over the galaxy. In a final, desperate move to crush the human rebellion, the Dominion's High Command made an unexpected offer: freedom. They reached out to the very species they had once subjugated, offering them their long-sought independence in exchange for assistance in defeating humanity. At first, many of these species, scarred by years of oppression, hesitated. But as the human forces continued to rise, gaining momentum with each successful strike against the Dominion, more and more former enemies of the Zinthar began to see the opportunity to fight back. The oppressed now saw a chance to break free from the Dominion's rule once and for all. Slowly, one by one, they joined forces with the humans, creating an unlikely alliance. The ragtag coalition was a sight to behold. Humans, rebels, and the remnants of countless alien species now stood side by side. Some came with their own technology, scavenged from the remnants of Dominion ships or from their own homeworlds, while others brought knowledge of tactics and warfare that had long been suppressed under Zinthar rule. Together, they pooled their resources, their expertise, and their hope, forming a united front that grew stronger by the day. It was a symbol of defiance, a message that no empire, no matter how powerful, could hold down the spirit of freedom forever. The humans, once dismissed as primitive and weak, were now a force to be reckoned with, and their growing alliance was making waves across the galaxy. The first few victories were small, yet significant. The new alliance's guerrilla tactics caught the Zinthar off guard, and soon the Dominion's once imposing fleets began to buckle under the pressure. The combined strength of humanity and its new allies pushed the Dominion back, planet by planet, star system by star system. The Empire was losing ground faster than they could reinforce it. And as each victory mounted, the Zinthar command began to realize something they had never anticipated: the true power of unity. Species that had once been enemies, now joined by a common goal, were turning the tide against their former oppressors. Captain Alara Nix stood at the forefront of this newfound coalition, guiding the Specter as it led the charge against the Zinthar forces. Every mission now had a new sense of purpose. As they cut through enemy lines and liberated planets once held captive by the Dominion, a new hope began to spread throughout the galaxy. The human spirit, which had been underestimated by so many, was now the spark that ignited a fire of rebellion across the stars. The Dominion, once an unstoppable force, was faltering under the combined pressure of its own cruelty and the determination of those it had subjugated. But just as victory seemed within reach, a darker force stirred in the depths of space, something ancient, powerful, and unknowable. As the Dominion's forces dwindled, something far worse began to emerge from the void: an entity older than any of the species involved in this war. It had been watching, waiting in the cold expanse of the galaxy, and it had taken notice of the humans. This new being, with power that could rival even the Zinthar Dominion, was no mere faction or empire. It was something else, something alien to the galaxy itself. The alliance of humans and former enemies might have been enough to challenge the Dominion, but this new entity was unlike anything they had ever faced. The first signs were subtle, anomalies. In the fabric of space, strange disturbances in the energy fields around the borders of known space. At first, the humans and their allies dismissed them as natural phenomena, but it soon became clear that something more sinister was at work. A presence was making itself known, its intentions unclear, but its power undeniable. The ships of the Alliance began to pick up strange signals, whispers that sent shivers down the spine of even the most seasoned crew members. The more they tried to understand, the more they realized the truth. This was no ordinary enemy. It was an ancient force, older than the Zinthar, older than any of the species that had ever known war. And it was coming. Captain Nix and her crew felt the weight of this revelation. They had won battles, formed alliances, and pushed the Zinthar to the brink of collapse, but now they were faced with a new, far greater threat. They had no idea what this new enemy wanted or why it was interested in humanity. But one thing was clear: the real fight was only just beginning. The war against the Zinthar was nothing compared to what lay ahead. And as the Alliance stood together, united by their struggle, they realized that the stakes had just grown far, far higher. The Zinthar Dominion, once an empire that spanned the galaxy, was now in full retreat. The pressure from humanity's relentless resistance and the strength of the newly formed alliance had finally taken its toll. One by one, the Dominion's strongholds fell. Their vast fleets, once an unstoppable force, were scattered across the stars, disorganized and desperate. The humans, alongside their new allies, had successfully pushed the Zinthar back, but there was still one final task to complete. The heart of the Dominion had to be destroyed once and for all. Captain Elara Nix, standing at the helm of the Specter, knew that this was the endgame. This would be the moment that decided the fate of the galaxy. The Specter led the charge into the Dominion's capital fleet. The ship, cloaked and deadly, moved like a phantom through the Zinthar lines, striking swift blows before vanishing into the darkness of space. Humanity's forces, emboldened by the successes of the past, rallied behind the Specter, their hearts filled with a mix of hope and determination. This was the moment they had fought for. This was the final assault. They would finish what they started and rid the galaxy of the Zinthar Empire forever. But just as victory seemed within reach, the Dominion unleashed their most devastating weapon yet, a temporal disruptor, a device capable of rewriting time itself. It was a weapon of unimaginable power, one that could erase everything, undoing all that humanity had fought for. The very fabric of time hung in the balance. The Specter was still moving through the heart of the enemy fleet when the disruptor's pulse shot out, disrupting the flow of time across entire sectors. Ships from both sides flickered in and out of existence, timelines twisting and collapsing as reality itself threatened to tear apart. Captain Nix's mind raced. They could not allow the temporal disruptor to succeed. If they did, all their efforts would be for nothing. Humanity would cease to exist, the Alliance would be lost, and the entire galaxy would be caught in an endless loop of chaos. Yet, there was no easy solution. The Specter was already in the heart of the Dominion's flagship, and time was running out. Captain Nix had only one choice: use the full power of the Specter to disable the weapon, no matter the cost. The crew of the Specter knew what was at stake. They understood the risks, and in that moment, they made a decision. Humanity's future was worth the gamble. As the ship raced through the heart of the Dominion's capital fleet, The crew worked together, pushing the Specter to its limits. The temporal disruptor was well guarded, its defenses nearly impenetrable, but with the Specter's cloaking abilities and advanced weaponry, they managed to infiltrate the flagship's defenses. Inside, the crew fought their way to the weapon's core. Every second counted. The Specter flickered in and out of existence, its cloaking systems strained as the crew made their final push. The power of the Dominion was staggering, but they had one advantage: their humanity. In that final moment, they activated the ship's most devastating weapon, using its core to disable the disruptor. The weapon sparked, its systems crashing and collapsing in on themselves. The Specter had done it. The temporal disruptor was destroyed, but the cost was high. As the weapon exploded in a brilliant flash of light, the Specter began to break apart. The ship had taken too much damage in its final mission, its systems crumbling as its hull groaned under the strain. The crew could feel the vibrations of the ship's death throes, each second bringing them closer to the inevitable. They had saved the galaxy, but at a price. Captain Nix, her heart heavy with the knowledge of what they had just accomplished, ordered the crew to prepare for evacuation. The escape was frantic. The Specter was falling apart, its systems shutting down one by one. The crew raced against time, trying to make it to the escape pods as the ship's core destabilized. It was a race for their lives, a desperate attempt to escape the collapsing vessel that had carried them to victory. As the last of the crew boarded the escape pods, Captain Nix looked back at the Specter one final time. The ship that had changed the course of history, that had given humanity a chance to fight, was now nothing more than a burning wreck in space. The Specter's destruction was a bittersweet victory. The Zinthar Dominion had been defeated, their empire crumbling into nothingness. But the cost of that victory had been immense. The crew had given everything to ensure humanity's future. As the escape pods drifted away, the remnants of the Specter faded into the distance. The galaxy had been saved, but the price of that salvation was one that would never be forgotten. Humanity had won, but at a cost that would echo across the stars for generations to come. The war was over. The Zinthar Dominion, once an unshakable empire that ruled with an iron grip across the galaxy, had fallen. Its fleets were scattered, its command broken, and its once feared leaders either captured or in hiding. The galaxy was free. For the first time in centuries, the oppressive shadow of the Dominion no longer loomed over countless star systems. Humanity, with the help of its newfound allies, had not only survived, but had emerged victorious. The Specter, the ship that had made this possible, was lost in the final battle, its advanced technology now scattered in the void. Yet its legacy lived on. The story of the human spirit, indomitable and resilient, had spread far and wide. The Specter was a symbol of that spirit, a reminder of what could be accomplished when species united, when the underdog dared to challenge the seemingly invincible. Captain Ilara Nix stood on a new command vessel, looking out at the stars. The quiet hum of the ship's engines was a far cry from the chaos of the battlefields she had known. She had been there, in the heart of it all, from the moment humanity discovered the Specter to the final desperate assault that had destroyed the Dominion's temporal disruptor and crippled the Empire for good. She was now a hero, celebrated across the galaxy for her bravery, her leadership, and the role she had played in the greatest rebellion the galaxy had ever witnessed. Yet, despite the accolades and the cheers, there was no joy in her eyes. She had seen too much, sacrificed too much to revel in victory. The loss of the Specter, the sacrifices of so many, weighed heavily on her heart. The war had taken a toll, not just on the soldiers and the civilians, but on the entire galaxy. Millions of lives had been lost, entire worlds had been scarred, and while the Dominion's oppression had ended, the wounds it had inflicted would take generations to heal. But humanity had proven something important in this war. They had proven that no empire, no matter how vast or powerful, could hold down a people who refused to bow. The humans had not only survived, they had conquered. They had faced an enemy unlike any before, and they had won. And now, standing on the edge of a new era, humanity was ready to face whatever came next. But Captain Nix knew the peace would not last. History had shown time and time again that after every great conflict, new challenges arose, new threats emerged. The Dominion had been defeated, but there were other powers in the galaxy, other forces beyond the scope of human understanding, that were watching, waiting. The universe was vast, and there were many unknowns. As much as the people celebrated their newfound freedom, Nix understood that this was only the beginning. There were still battles to be fought, still worlds to protect, and still mysteries to unravel. The Specter was gone, but its technology, its power, and its legacy were now part of humanity's story. They had the knowledge, the will, and the unity to face whatever lay ahead. Standing there, gazing out into the endless stars, Captain Nix made a silent vow. Humanity would never stop fighting. They would not sit idly by as new threats rose. They had fought to free the galaxy from the tyranny of the Zinthar, and they would stand ready to defend it against whatever forces dared to challenge the peace they had won. The Specter was lost, but its spirit was alive in every human who had fought, in every alien who had joined the Alliance, and in every child who would now grow up in a galaxy free from oppression. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson, one that would be passed down through the generations. Never underestimate humanity. No matter the odds, no matter the challenge, the human spirit was a force unlike any other. And with that spirit, humanity would chart a course toward a new future. One where the lessons of the past would guide them and where the promise of peace, however fleeting, would always be worth fighting for.